Nursing home creeper. I have so many stories of creepy dudes who follow me. I swear it's like I have a sign on my forehead that says, stalk me. The first guy I met while I was volunteering in the office at a nursing home so I could get my volunteer hours for my Catholic confirmation. This was back in 2003, so I was 13 years old. Let me preface this by saying I am a tiny female. I always have been. At that time, I was around 4'11 and weighed about 110 pounds. So, one day, I was at the nursing home, working in the office, organizing mail, faxing papers, copying, the normal stuff. My volunteer coordinator asked me to go drop off the mail to the residents in their room, so I do. I start off at the second floor and work my way up from there. It was fairly uneventful until I got to the fifth floor. Here is where it starts to get weird. I go to drop off the mail to the one man by the name of Rob. He was a paraplegic, kinda like Stephen Hawking's, but he could move his head and speak normally. He couldn't do anything else on his own besides that, and move his right hand to move his electric wheelchair around. I knock on the door, he tells me to come inside, so I do and I place his mail on the closest table. I then go to turn around to leave, and he's right in front of me. I stop and kind of freeze. I really don't like talking to strangers, and the vibes I was getting from just being in the room creep me out. I try to politely ask him to move, but he refuses. Instead, he tells me that he needs me to help him get into bed. I look at the bed and notice a whole wall full of posters of half-naked women. I definitely wasn't comfortable in that room after that. I tell him that I'm just a volunteer, and I'm not allowed to touch the clients in any way, but I'll definitely get a nurse to help him get into bed. He refuses, and is adamant that I have to help him get into bed. At this point, I am thoroughly creeped out, and I hated that he was leering at me, so I politely nope the fuck out of there. I fast walk to the stairwell and run down the stairs, not even bothering to worry about dropping the rest of the mail off. I get to the office, and I'm telling my volunteer coordinator what happened, and who do I see? Rob coming around the corner. Now at this point, it's time for me to go home, so I have her sign my time card, and I run to the nearest bus stop. Just as the bus was pulling up, Rob comes trucking along in his wheelchair. I jump on the bus, pay my fare, and watch as he stops and stares at me as we drive past. About a week later, I go back, and this time my coordinator asked me to help out with the activities. No problem. I like talking to most of the clients there, and the nurse that was in charge was awesome. It was my favorite thing to do, and I was seriously considering becoming activity coordinator for the nursing home once I got old enough to do it. I was planning on staying in my position well after I got my needed hours. I thoroughly enjoyed it, to be honest. Well, halfway through bingo, Rob comes rolling up. I see him and politely smile at him. You know, the smile, tight-lipped kind, doesn't reach your eyes, very standoffish, that one. He doesn't seem to get the hint, and instead parks right next to me. He talks my ear off, the entire time staring at my chest. Eventually, it's time for me to leave, so I get up, grab my book bag, and walk out. It's fairly dark at this point. Night comes early in the late fall and early winter in the northern US. Rob follows me out, but thankfully the bus is there, so I just hop on and make my way home. He ends up doing the same thing for the rest of the time I volunteered there. When I mentioned it to my mother, she laughed it off and said he was harmless. I fully believe that if he wasn't a paraplegic, he would have been like a serial rapist and killer. A year after I left the nursing home, I'm visiting my mother at work. She worked in a parking garage her brother owned, located a couple blocks away from the nursing home. We go out to eat at local Cuban chicken restaurants. All seems normal. I look out the window and who do I see? Rob. Sitting right in front of the window, staring at me. My mom laughs and tells me to go say hi. I refuse and she keeps pressing it. I still refuse. My dad notices how uncomfortable he's making me feel, so he tells my mom to drop it and don't force me to talk to some man I clearly don't like. I seriously jumped out of my chair and hugged my dad. Rob was still sitting there, staring at me, so my dad got up and went to go talk to him. I still don't know what he said, but Rob hightailed out of there and never tried to talk to me again. I saw him a few more times after that, but he always turned around and stayed away. He's definitely dead now, and that brings me the greatest relief. Creepy guy in a nursing home. I'm a 17-year-old male in the Wisconsin area. I work night from 4 to 7 at a dishwashing gig at a nursing home. It most definitely is not the best job, but I'm getting ready to move out and need all the money I can get. This story takes place a month ago during one of my shifts. First, the cooks leave, and then servers leave around 6:15 p.m. because that's closing time. The kitchen setup is very small. It's a couple coolers, a dishwasher, some places to put silverware, and a refrigerator. To enter the kitchen area, you go to the nursing home, go up one elevator to down a long hallway, and then up another until you reach a door that simply says kitchen. No one is allowed in there if you don't work there. And I mean no one. Residents have been fined heavily for going in the kitchen and starting an argument over their burger being undercooked. Back to me, however, I'm working, and the last of the servers and the managers begin to leave. He tells me to mop and sweep my area and take the towels down. I of course say yes, and continue to finish the dishes while listening to some music on my phone. The song was called Lettuce Sandwich by Little Skies, and I turned it way up, so I'm sitting there finishing up and rocking out. Now I know I may get some heat for this, but I was high as hell. I normally smoke a bowl or two before work so the day can go faster. My manager notices and jokes about it from time to time, but I am a hard worker and don't smell like weed because I keep my clothes out of my room while I'm smoking, so it's no issue at all. So I'm sitting there high as hell blasting music. When I finally get done, I grab the cart and begin to roll it to the dining area to put the dishes away when something catches my eye. I see the head of a man ducked underneath a table. At first, I thought I was going crazy. I did the stereotypical eye rub to make sure he wasn't facing me and wasn't moving. There was no way someone should be here. The door to the dining room is locked. Once the cooks leave and the servers leave, this guy would have to enter the kitchen door, which wasn't locked, because I hadn't finished everything up, and walk past me to the dining area to go under a friggin' table and just lay there? At this point, I've already had enough and nothing really happened. I'm thinking it may be a crazy old man who got lost, so I go up to him and ask him if he needs any help. I kid you not, a 6-foot black guy turns and looks at me, looking like he was in his mid-20s. He had a scar on his cheek, and his lip looked burned or something, like he had hot tea thrown in his face. He gets from under the table and asks if Jermaine would be coming to pick up his order tonight. The residents can order food and come get it and take it back to their room instead of eating it there. But it was past closing time. No one would have ordered because it's past closing time. I tell him this and he gets visibly deranged. I don't know how to explain it, but he didn't look mad. He just looked insane when I said no one was coming here. His eyes widened and a half smile and glare was aimed at me. He then grabbed my work shirt and pulled me close to him and whispered in my ear, "You tell that old bastard he owes me 1,000,000 lives." Before turning around and exiting through the kitchen door, I begin to shake as I'm very rapidly coming down from my high, trying not to yell at the top of my lungs. I finish off my shift and come in the next day to report what I had seen. Every one of the higher-ups blackballed me. They wouldn't start an investigation, wouldn't look at security footage or any of that. Maybe they think I was high or something. I'm well liked, so they weren't mean about it, more like telling me just to fucking forget about it. And it's not worth the friggin' time. Whoever that guy was still scares me deeply. Why he was hiding under the table, who the hell is Jermaine, and why no one will investigate this further, I don't know. So, whoever you are, you weirdo looking for some guy in a nursing home, that's not me. Old nun in the nursing home. I guess I'll make my first post a creepy one. When I was in nursing school, I worked as an aide working night shifts in a Catholic nursing home. Many retired nuns lived there and many had dementia. They only allowed female aides to work down the unit where the nuns lived. It was about 2 a.m. one night, and my only other coworker, the nurse, was on break. I heard some noise down the hall and went to find out who was awake. It was an elderly nun with dementia in bed whispering parts of the rosary in very fragmented speech. This surprised me because this resident had very advanced dementia and rarely spoke. She had kicked off all of her covers. I walked in to check if she needed changed and fixed her bed covers. As I leaned over to turn her onto her side, she whispered, "Hug me." and I'll tell you when you're going to die." This is the only full sentence I ever heard this woman speak. I quickly covered her back up and went back to the nurse's station until my coworker returned. The resident passed away of a stroke a few weeks later, and I never heard her utter another word. Private caretaker who turned out to be an angry alcoholic. This story is more sad than creepy, so be warned. Starting out with the sad part. My grandma died from cancer. Before that happened, she was in a really bad state, going slowly insane and losing health really quickly. My father cannot handle such things, and my mother had to divide herself between working and caretaking, and she is herself not someone who is made for nursing either, so she did it out of duty. There was no good solution, but in the end, my mother went to a private caretaking company to ask for a 24/7 nurse. In Europe, Germany to be exact, the nurses that are sent are usually from Eastern Europe, and depending on the price you can pay, some cannot speak the language of the country they will go to well. They move between countries for jobs and stuff like that, which are often hard. While having made horrible experiences with Savetta, the nurse in question, I want to emphasize that a lot of them have a very hard life, and often the system they have to work for is horrible. That said, in our case, the company seemed to be trustworthy. They had a German quality control. It offered to seize any contract for 14 days after arrival if there was any huge problems, and they were interested in asking questions to provide the optimal person for the job. You will not be surprised that it was kind of a sham. First person to arrive was some poor 18-year-old girl from Romania who couldn't speak a single word of English or German, and that meant she had no clue what my grandma wanted when she said something. So we had to tell her after some minutes that she'd have to go, which understandably sent her crying. The company played with poor girls and hoped desperate people would accept them anyways. The other encounters all weren't perfect either, but Savetta was the worst one because she seemed perfect at first. She came from Slovakia, spoke German almost flawlessly, said she had experience with cancer patients, and while I found her a bit cold and didn't feel very easy around her, my mother and grandma seemed to get along with her well. In fact, they both praised her. My mother even bought a 3-month coupon for the nearby swimming hall. She said she enjoyed swimming, so we started out in good faith. I know I already talked around the bush for some time, but I promise I will start now after outlining the situation my grandma was in some more. My grandma was a typical war child, traumatized and completely lost after my grandfather died. She lived in her own world, being depressed and living in all kinds of delusions. What she needed the most was for someone to constantly talk to who would listen. And while I and my parents did as much as we could not provide it for 24 hours a day. What is also important is that her war trauma ran very deep, because her father died in a concentration camp, not a Jewish, a Russian camp. And she was there when they took him, so her favorite activity since decades before she died was researching about war, watching every documentary and relieving her trauma, asking herself how something so gruesome could ever happen. That is why we were really happy to have Savetta there, who could understand her and even give her actual answers, instead of just being silent. It went smoothly until Savetta heard that my grandma would soon die. She didn't know it before, which was strange, since the company briefed her, and she exactly was here to intensively care for a cancer patient. What did she expect? At that point, she became really strange. We believe she expected to get money by staying longer, and couldn't really take going home after just some months, but we'll never know. In any case, she started being angry at other nurses. There's a daycare team coming in certain intervals to provide meds and check for other medical needs, and they were a tad too late. She became colder when talking to other people, and she started breaking a lot of stuff on accident. At that point we didn't know, but she also drank a lot, and even tripped or bumped into walls. The situation escalated when one day, the daycare nurses came so late that it was early evening when she arrived. This wasn't a problem for anyone, we all understood, But Savetta was furious. She didn't even notice when the daycare was there, but it meant that she would have to do some tasks much later, and she was very angry before already. She went to my grandma's room after the daycare was gone, angry that she missed them, and demanded to get the number from my grandma to call them and complain. My grandma said that she didn't want to complain. The daycare people were really nice to her, and that she was fine with being with them later. Savetta kept demanding the number. I heard noises and went towards the part of the house where my grandma lived. At first, I didn't barge in because I wanted to hear what was going on, and I didn't know whether they were arguing or just talking loudly. I decided this was very wrong when I heard Savetta say, "You're a typical German woman. Hard without warmth, a real Nazi." I started moving towards the room, and before I arrived, I heard Savetta adding, "If you're not nice to me, I'll leave you alone and no one will care for you when you die." That was the point where I finally barged in and demanded to know what was going on. The look on Savetta's face was freaking me out, because it went from insanely hateful towards crying in a second. She was trying to actually convince me that my grandma had insulted her and threatened her with shunning her away. Since I heard the exact opposite out of this woman's mouth before, I knew she was lying. My grandma was extremely agitated, understandably. It was the worst thing that this girl could have said to her due to her war trauma, and told her that she also thinks Savetta should go if she offers it that lightly. Savetta then instantly changed her story towards me and my grandma and claimed it was just a misunderstanding because she cannot speak German well, and she never said Nazi, but said you were a hard woman. The Nazis' education made you that way, which I knew for a fact it was a lie because I friggin' heard it. At that point, fortunately, my mom came in, and my mother is a very no bullshit person. She instantly told her to go to the room that she lived in and not get near my grandma again, and instantly contacted the agency. Now comes the actual creepy part. Savetta had to stay one more night in our house, because the agency could only provide someone to pick her up the morning after. That means she has only one more night in the flat of my grandma. She repeatedly tried to reason with my parents to let her stay, but obviously to no avail. At that point, my father noticed that lots of wine and beer bottles were missing from our storage. He was like, "Oh well, I guess Savetta took them, but whatever. It is no big deal. I just hope she goes tomorrow." But I was more concerned about that. My parents had only seen her crying act, but I saw the hateful eyes she had before, and that woman was 2 rooms away from my dying grandma right now, possibly drinking herself silly. I was quite honestly afraid. So, since I am night active anyways, I moved to a part of the house where I could hear noises from my grandma's flat, and would see if the light in the hallway would turn up, doing some uni work on my laptop. At some point I was cold and it felt silly to keep sitting on the stairs I was on. At that point it was 3 a.m. and I was already wondering whether I should just go, thinking even if she drank herself silly, she'd be sleeping by now. And that was the point I saw the light switching on. While I was there for exactly that case, I didn't know what to do. I just stood up and moved to a position where I could really easily see the hallway, and I saw that woman slowly moving towards my grandma's door. And not just normally moving, she was pissed drunk and almost fell, and she had a wine bottle in her hand. I wanted to really make sure she was not going to the kitchen to get like a knife or something like that. For some reason, I didn't want to talk, so I knocked onto the wall to make her see me. There she stood, a wine bottle in one hand, the other on the doorknob, and faces me with the coldest expression I have ever seen in my whole entire life. This was not hateful anymore like before. Not like you'd look at someone in an argument. While I do not know what her intention was, the expression was one of understanding. That just stopped her from doing something horrible, almost taunting, like, "You saw me. What do you want to do?" And I didn't know. I just moved some steps towards her and said, "Go," in a shaky voice. Then she smiled in a menacing way, put the wine bottle to the ground in front of the door and turned around. She went to her room again. I moved towards the wine bottle and noticed the bottle was empty, which confirmed my biggest fear that she was actually wanting to hurt my grandma there. Why would she have an empty bottle with her to go there? Whatever she might have planned, she didn't. Fortunately, my mother stands up regularly at 6 a.m., and thus I only had to go for another 3 hours. I kept sitting in the hallway because I was not taking any chances anymore. The next day at 8 a.m., Savedia was gone, and only then I told my mother that. I'd seen her moving in the hallway. I left at the scary parts because I didn't want to strain my mother any further. She was doing insane work with my grandmother already, and I could only provide little help since I was already living someplace an hour away and had to move between it and my parents' home. I wish the story had a nicer ending, but after that, we ceased any contact with that company and for the remaining time, nursed my grandma ourselves. It was not long. She only had 3 more weeks left. It still is soothing to know that, after a long period of pain, she could peacefully sleep away. Thus, instead of being paid more than she had to, the company had the galls to try and charge us for the work of all the nurses they sent us. We paid for the ones who actually did work, and again, I don't want this to be like a hate post against Eastern European nurses, but for Savedia, my mom didn't pay a cent, even though their line of reasoning was, oh well, she screwed up on her last day, but before she cleaned, right? They threatened to go to court, but didn't. And that was the end of it. So, you crazy woman, I hope I will not see you again, and in fact, I hope no elderly person will ever have to be subjected to you again. While we couldn't prove anything, I at least hope she was fired from that company.